Hello, everyone. Thanks for attending Digital Science's first annual showcase. In today's session, funders innovating and collaborating on global challenges. Now, before we get started, I wanted to go through a few housekeeping items. As everyone is dealing with different remote working issues, we decided that in order to reduce the risk of technical difficulties, or in some cases, non-technical difficulties like kid interruptions that many of us are dealing with every day, we decided to show recordings of the presentations, but we will have the presenters available for a live Q&A at the end. And speaking of questions, please post any questions you have in the Ask a Question box. You'll be able to see the questions that others have asked and even vote or move them up the priority list to get answered. And then finally, feel free to use that chat feature you see to chat to one another or to us. Although again, for actual questions you want us to address, please use the questions feature. So today's agenda will include, first, a quick intro by me, and I promise, don't worry, I won't take up too much time as I know everyone is really here for our awesome presenters. Then we'll jump into our speakers, Lynne Davies at the International Cancer Research Partnership, Kierstin Lundell-Smith from the Graham Boeckh Foundation, who'll be talking about the International Alliance of Mental Health Research Funders, Maryrose Franko from the Health Research Alliance, and Mike Perham at HHMI's Janelia Research Campus. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll close with a live Q&A with the panel. So very quickly, about me, for those of you who don't know me already, I work with funders, nonprofits, and government groups in primarily North and South America. I started my career as a grants manager for the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation and then the Foundation for the National Institutes of Health, so I'm very familiar with funders. And then I later extended my experience with funders by working for a grants management solution product, where I was exposed to grants management operations of hundreds of funders. And this quite perfectly segued to my work at Digital Science, where I work with more types of organizations doing research than just funders. And most of you are already familiar with Digital Science, but in case we're completely new to you, in short, we're a research solutions business with a portfolio of data, software, and analytical service capabilities. And we serve the needs of the scientific and research communities at all points during the research process. We work with millions of researchers and thousands of organizations, from US federal agencies to universities to companies, and even nonprofits of all sizes, from the smallest to the largest. And as you'll hear today, we work with many funder consortia, in fact, even more than you'll hear about in this session. And speaking of this session, you'll hear about the amazing work each group is doing and a little bit of how we factor in. It's worth noting that what they'll be talking about is really just the tip of the iceberg of the types of things we do. So there's so much we do to support those with funding missions, like portfolio analysis, landscape analysis, finding reviewers and experts, impact assessment, and even grants management. So if you're interested in learning more about any of these topics, like our impact analysis or our grants management solution, CC Grant Tracker, or any of the work that you'll hear the speakers talk about today, please feel free to reach out to me. And with that, let's go to our first presenter, Lynne Davies from the International Cancer Research Partnership, to hear more about their work. Lynne, over to you.
Hello, my name is Lynne Davies and I'm the Operations Manager of the International Cancer Research Partnership. I'm delighted to participate in the Digital Science Showcase today. What is the International Cancer Research Partnership? ICRP started in 2000 as an initiative between the US National Cancer Institute and the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Programs of the US Department of Defense. And it's now grown to be a collaborative of 29 partners representing 142 international cancer research funding organizations and institutes. Our current partners are from Australia, Canada, Europe, Japan, the UK, and the US, and we're actively recruiting more partners in other countries. Our members include a very wide range of organizations, from large governmental or charity organizations such as the US National Cancer Institute and Cancer Research UK, through to specific organizations funding research on specific cancer site or specific treatment modalities. So what do we do? The ICRP's mission is really to add value to the cancer research efforts of individual organisations by fostering collaboration and strategic coordination between those organisations. On a practical level, that means that we share data online about the research portfolios of each of those individual cancer organisations. We provide analytical tools for data analysis, whether it be at the individual partner level or at a national or international level. And in addition, it's not just about data, we share information about research evaluation practices, research management, and mechanisms of recording and understanding research impact. We also provide a forum for coordination and collaboration. Our partners meet monthly on teleconferences organised in rotation around various time zones, so that partners can really get together to understand what the current challenges are for cancer research funding organisations and how to address those ultimately for patient benefit. So I'm going to talk a little bit first about data. As I mentioned, we have our partners' research portfolios online, and each of those cancer research projects is classified according to a system that I'll describe a little later. Essentially, what we're trying to capture within our system is who is funding cancer research. So by that I mean, who are the PIs, who are the collaborators, and who are the funders. We're also looking to capture what is being funded. Our database currently includes over $8.5 billion in cancer research investment per year. That translates into over 300,000 projects, each of those coded to one or more types of cancer and one or more types of research. Those projects represent research in over 7,000 host institutions in 61 countries. And we're also looking to see which projects are current and which are historic, so we can track trends over time. We estimate that our database includes around 65% of global cancer research, and we're working with various partners and also with commercial organisations and NGOs, such as Digital Science Dimensions, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, to identify other funders and funded projects that we don't currently include in our system. The website and database are open to the public. The public site allows users to determine which funders are funding research in a particular topic. It allows researchers to locate potential research collaborators via our interactive geospatial map. And it also allows researchers to avoid duplication. Many of our organisations require that their grant applicants assess the ICRP database in the first instance to ensure that they're not submitting a grant proposal that's duplicative. As I mentioned, within the partner site, we have enhanced analysis tools for our partners and access to funding data per project. There's very comprehensive structured search functionality, which can be viewed here on our database search. In terms of the detail per project, the title of the project is included, award codes, project dates, whether or not it's childhood cancer related. The names of collaborators are included if those are available. There's a summary of research, technical summary, and a public abstract if available as well. And then obviously the classifications. So each of our projects, as I mentioned, is classified to one of 35 subcategories of a type of research and can be classified also to one or more cancer site codes. The challenge is that we have over 30,000 projects a year to code these classifications, and it's a real time sink, it's a real challenge. So with that in mind, we approached Digital Science to request a collaboration to look at automated coding of projects. So we supplied thousands of coded projects to the company. They used then a machine learning approach to predict research and cancer type codes. And after a series of pilots and iterations, the system was adopted once human-machine iterated coding reliability was as reliable as human to human. So essentially what happens now is that we load uncoded data into the system. auto codes are assigned. We can validate those and change them as needed, because obviously as science develops, sometimes the coding needs to catch up. And we then load those into the ICRP database. And the benefits for ICRP are numerous. Essentially, we're getting faster coding. It's reducing barriers to submitting data for our organisations. And then, of course, more importantly, it's taking time away from coding to analysis. So we're giving more time for our expert partner members to analyse the data rather than coding it. And the reason that we do that is in order to understand the cancer research landscape, and that's why data is so essential to our activities. We're looking to synthesize the information within the database to identify research gaps, to track funding over time, to look to see whether initiatives that have been set up are translating into research results, and also to identify collaborative research. And that's really giving intelligence for the cancer research community to help them with strategic planning, to look at what gaps need to be addressed, and then to look at opportunities to collaborate. So we do a lot of top-level trend analysis. And as you can see here, we've got the research types, which are separated into 6 different buckets. We've seen consistently that prevention, for example, is a very low percentage of our research activity. And those gaps have been noted by our organisations, and various organisations have set up initiatives to set up calls for proposals so that organisations can co-fund projects in primary prevention. A recent example of that last week was a co-funding announcement by the World Cancer Research Fund International and Cancer Australia, both partners of ICRP, who are seeking proposals in primary prevention. So in addition to doing that sort of top level analysis, we also do a lot of topic specific analysis depending on what is thrown up by our top level information, or topics that are of interest to our partners. So, for example, in recent years, we've looked at childhood cancer research, lung cancer research, health disparities and health equities, to really attempt to dig into what is happening in the international portfolio and ensure that we're responding appropriately to that as partners. I would add that it's not just about data, it's also about the common challenges that face cancer research organisations. And of course, in the current climate, something that is particularly concerning is the impact of COVID-19 on cancer research funders and the funds that are available to conduct cancer research. So with that in mind, earlier this year, in response to partner concerns, we set up a survey to look at how funders were being impacted, and of our respondents, around 75% of those reported that their funding to support cancer research this year would decrease substantially in many cases. And it was no surprise to us that the majority of those affected were the charitable and non-profit sector, and we're continuing to monitor that very closely to see how that's going to impact on cancer research funding in the future, and of course to seek support for that. So if anybody's interested in that, you can access the full report and the responses to the survey via our website. And that was launched yesterday on World Cancer Research Day. I hope I've given you a flavour of what ICRP is about and how we've been using our collaboration with digital science to further our mission. And I'd like to thank you again, and the organisers of the meeting, for the opportunity to present.
Thanks so much to Lynne for that fantastic presentation. Next up, we have Kierstin Lundell-Smith from the Graham Boeckh Foundation, who will be talking about their work as part of the International Alliance of Mental Health Research Funders. Over to you, Kierstin.
First of all, thank you to Digital Science for putting together this showcase, and thank you, Monika, for inviting me and giving me the chance to share a really fantastic example of funders innovating and collaborating on global challenges. I'm Kierstin Lundell-Smith, and today I'll be talking to you about the International Alliance of Mental Health Research Funders. I don't think there can be any question that mental health poses a tremendous global challenge. About 1 in 4 people can expect to experience mental illness at some point in their lifetime, and most of these will not get effective treatment So this is an area of huge unmet need, both in low and middle income countries and in high income settings, and a huge contributor to the burden of illness. There's no question either that research is part of the answer to this challenge. We need to better understand what's going on in the brain. We need better treatments, and we need to make and learn how to make better use of existing treatments and have research to find out how best to reach all of those who need help with their mental health. So I'm going to start today by telling you more about this International Alliance of Mental Health Research Funders, and then move on to talk about a particular project that we're undertaking in order to map funding of mental health research globally and get a really solid baseline for the first time ever. So the International Alliance of Mental Health Research Funders is a group that started about 10 years ago with the goal of making research funding more effective and to really have more of an impact in improving the lives of patients and their families. So we're a group of about 25 different funders that run the gamut from charities to philanthropic organizations to industry, and also large public and government funders. And in addition to those members, we have 30 or so partner organizations that we work with. And these include UN organizations, publishers, other networks and NGOs, policymakers and government representatives, and of course, people with lived and living experience and research institutes. So we also have a global reach, and this is a growing network. We're spanning quite a number of time zones now for the different meetings that we have. And in recent years have made a bit of a push to make sure we're getting more inclusion of low and middle income countries. And this is something that we're continuing to grow with. So what is the point of this network? Well, the goal really is to better coordinate with each other in order to have a greater impact for the research that we fund. We do that by facilitating an international conversation. Typically, in the past, this has been through annual in-person meetings in a particular spot. Obviously, in recent months, that hasn't been so possible, so we've moved more of those activities online, but still quite a high degree of engagement. And hopefully through this work, we can break down silos in a field that's notorious for people reinventing the wheel, going their own way, and not talking to each other quite as much as they should. And the hope is by doing that, that we can change the way that we fund mental health research in order to have that greater impact and to promote knowledge exchange and collaboration in general. So how do we achieve these goals? In the most recent in-person meeting that we had in 2019, many of the funders decided to take steps to work much more closely together by forming working groups around problems that are of mutual interest. So the one that's probably made the most progress so far is a group on data harmonization, and their goal is to have a minimum standard set of mental health related questions that are asked by the researchers that they fund in order to be able to aggregate data so we can finally do things like meta-analyses in this field, which are extremely difficult with the huge proliferation of different measures that exist. There's also a working group on fund mobilization, trying to get more research funding into this incredibly important area. Another group on global mental health research, which focuses on making sure that we harness all of the research potential in different parts of the world, including low and middle income countries, that's just vastly underutilized. And the final group is focused on making sure that we systematically involve those with lived and living experience in the work that we do, because their input is just so vital to any sort of decision making that affects them. But beyond these working groups, we've also in the past undertaken certain studies that are of mutual interest to many different people and organizations within the Alliance. And these have focused on trying to understand the returns on mental health research in terms of what has the greatest impact in different time scales, also international comparative performance, and a project just to identify through bibliometrics who is funding in this field. And those projects were all done in collaboration with RAND Europe. But moving on to the project that we're undertaking right now that's quite exciting, we actually don't know how much money goes into mental health research right now. And that's something that we're trying to change. So for the first time ever, we're trying to create a global picture of mental health research funding, and this will be a baseline to try to guide decisions and priorities in the years to come, and to know just how much we're spending and how it's spent. And the idea is to repeat this type of analysis every few years so we can see how the field is evolving and what changes are being made. So in terms of the study design, we've been using the Dimensions database, which is this tremendous repository of grants, specifically focusing on the grants, which lets us look at a bit more of a current snapshot and see what's coming forward. And to analyze these in order to answer questions about what types of research are being funded and to what extent. This goes from basic biomedical through to health systems design. Looking at types of funders, so how much is coming from government funders versus philanthropy versus fundraising charities. Breaking down spending by mental health conditions, knowing how much we're spending on schizophrenia research, on research into depression, on research that isn't so specific to particular conditions. We also tried to take a bit of a look at comorbidities and looking at research focused on different age groups. So young people, older adults, and all of us in between. And another lens that we took was doing some regional deep dives on areas that are particularly interesting to our stakeholders and our large drivers of mental health research. So in order to do this, we've worked quite closely with digital science. I've already mentioned the Dimensions database, which is really the only repository that we were able to find with this level of information. And without it, I just don't think a study of this sort would be possible. We've also collaborated quite closely to then analyze those grants and break down spending by different years and different health categories. It's been great to be able to bounce ideas off each other and figure out best practices for checking the data and doing a little bit of quality control as well. We've made tremendous use of the machine learning categories that come with the Dimensions database, just in order to identify which grants are relevant to mental health research. We've made strong use of HRCS, which is the British system for classifying health research, both into different disease areas and also into the type of funding, from underpinning research of healthy function through to development of treatments, and finally to disease management and service delivery. We've also used their category of RCDC, which comes out of the NIH, to help identify more mental health research grants and grants for particular disease areas. And we even use the field of research to help us do some manual checks. And an additional feature we were able to use is MQ, which is a charity based in the UK, underwent a similar kind of project mapping UK mental health research. And we were able to work out with them to use their My categories that they spent quite a bit of time developing. So that was quite exciting for us. And what we're going to be delivering from that is a public-facing report. We have an academic publication currently under peer review explaining all of the steps that we took, and a data set that's going to be available to International Alliance of Mental Health Research funders in order to run their own analyses that we might not have come up with. So we're very excited to be coming to the end of producing these deliverables, and they will be published quite soon. So that'll be fantastic to be able to share. And I'm also looking forward to hearing your thoughts and questions in the discussion later on. Thank you.
Kierstin, thanks so much for that interesting talk about the work you're doing. On a personal note, I'm really looking forward to reviewing the report that will be coming out about the landscape study. And next, we have Maryrose Franko, who'll be talking about the various initiatives of the Health Research Alliance. Over to you, Maryrose.
My name is Maryrose Franko, and I'm the Executive Director of the Health Research Alliance. I've been leading HRA for just over 5 years, and before that, I was with the Howard Hughes Medical Institute for 20 years, so I definitely bring the funder's perspective. HRA is a consortium of almost 100 nonprofit, non-governmental funders of biomedical research, mostly based in the US. As you can see on this graphic, our members vary widely in size and in mission, and in research area, ranging from basic science to disease specific. So we work together to address big challenges in research, but we don't speak with one voice. HRA's mission is to maximize the impact of our members' investment in research. And we do that by communication and collaboration, and collecting and sharing our funding data, promoting innovations in grant making and in other areas that increase research's impact, and work together to advance discovery. These aren't just words. Turns out that we need to use all of these tools in our arsenal to address science's global challenges. Most of HRA's work gets done in our 10 working groups, such as data sharing, DEI, evaluation, and open science, just to highlight a few. Members come together to identify challenges and develop solutions. And to do that, they invite experts to present and collect and identify resources. And when none exist, we create our own and share those with the membership and the community. For instance, we're working with Molly Carnes at the University of Wisconsin. She's in the process of developing online reviewer training to reduce bias in peer review. We also collected and disseminated funders' responses to COVID and assessed HRA members' grantees' needs after COVID. We also provided the link to Digital Sciences COVID-19 Research Pass, which our researchers did find very helpful. Our listserv is also a place to learn from each other and share ideas and experiences. And sometimes our working groups recommend that HRA invest significant resources to create infrastructure, as both our evaluation working group and the Open Science Task Force did, resulting in the platforms HRA Analyzer, HRA Reporter, and HRA Open. And these platforms are where I'll focus the rest of my talk. We invested significant resources in these platforms because they're critical to enhancing HRA members' investment in research. First is HRA Analyzer. It's our flagship platform and enables the other two. It's a real-time, searchable database of HRA member-funded grants accessible to HRA members only. You might not think it's innovative, but its predecessor, which was called GRASP, was the very first database of nonprofit funding and gave members the ability to supercharge their portfolio and landscape analysis. GRASP had data that went back before 2006, but in 2016, we migrated that data to a much more powerful dimensions platform. Currently in development is a public version of HRA Analyzer called HRA Reporter because it serves the same function as NIH Reporter. And HRA Open is our third platform, and it enables researchers funded by HRA members to post their publications to PubMed Central, just as if they were funded by the NIH, plus a lot more functionality. Now I'll give you a bit more detail on Analyzer and HRA Open. HRA Analyzer helps HRA members make informed decisions in many areas, not the least of which is where to put limited grant dollars where they'll have the most impact. We know we can't compete with the NIH, so it's helpful to see both NIH funding and HRA member funding all in one place. We can also drill down on the individual researcher level to see who is doing impactful research and in what areas. We can look for reviewers or scientific advisors, and we can see if someone is already funding that person or that project. We can also use Analyzer to find other funders to collaborate with on new programs. What's really timely and valuable about Analyzer is the ability to ask some very important questions about the diversity of your portfolio and the career trajectory of your grantees. So this is a schematic of the data flow to HRA Analyzer. Data generally comes from grants management systems as part of the application. And data goes into HRA Analyzer after curation by Digital Science. We used to have to manually code research areas and manually disambiguate records. Not having to do that alone is an enormous time saver and provides an increased level of accuracy. In addition to the fields that you expect, name, institution, grant term, amount of award, which are available for analysis in Analyzer, digital science helped us create our offline database. That's where we store fields like career stage, meaning postdoc, assistant professor, or full professor, for example, or the award purpose. For instance, is it a training fellowship or a postdoc fellowship or a research grant? These fields help us follow the careers of our grantees as they move from funder to funder and up the career ladder. But if funders collect gender and race ethnicity data on their applications, that data is available for analysis in the offline database. Analyzer can show diversity in terms of research area or grantee institutions. However, funders have implemented specific programs to increase gender and racial diversity, so they need to be able to evaluate the success of those strategies. And our offline database can be extremely helpful in doing that, but only when funders collect this information. And another challenge funders face is that we want our researchers to make all the outputs of our funded research freely accessible to the public, at the very least following the NIH guidelines. Many of us believe open research outputs can advance the pace of discovery and will certainly multiply our investment in research. But again, acknowledging that we have limited resources, how can we do this without adding costs for either the researcher or the funding agency? And it's not enough to make the outputs public. Research outputs need to be open under the FAIR principles: findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. We need to acknowledge that research outputs do stand alone, but when they are used in articles, the article must link to the FAIR dataset or other output. We also want to know about, and we want to give credit for, all research outputs that result from our funding. So we want researchers to link not only to publications, but to link all research outputs to our grant, even to the level of a figure. And we really want to make sure all of this is happening. HRA Open fulfills all of these goals. HRA Open is a collaboration between HRA, Digital Science, and the National Library of Medicine. As I mentioned, HRA members provide grant data to HRA Analyzer. That data is exported to Figshare. New grantees log into Figshare using the HRA Open portal to create a record that is then exported to the NLM. That means their database has all of our grantees, just the same as it has NIH grantees. Now, when they get a publication, either the publisher has already sent the pub to NLM, or the grantee goes into the NIH manuscript submission system themselves and uploads their paper. Either way, they then need to link that publication to their grant record, and then it's published to PMC. But the Figshare part of HRA Open also allows for grantees to deposit other research outputs according to FAIR principles and link those outputs to any publication, but also to our grant. There are also robust admin tools in both PMC and in Figshare to let us see who has deposited outputs and link them to our grants. This is just a snapshot of the exciting research outputs that grantees can post at Figshare that are linked to their PubMed Central manuscript and then linked to the grant that funded the work. Not only does this help us track the outputs of our funding, but it enables researchers to get credit for any and all outputs, not just journal publications, which is a much better way of rewarding researchers, especially early career investigators. And with that, I want to thank everyone for listening. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Maryrose. It is always great to see how much HRA is doing. Really impressive. And then finally, before we head to our live Q&A, we have Mike from the Howard Hughes Medical Institute's Janelia Research Campus, who will be talking about their fascinating work. My words, not Mike's. No pressure, Mike. Over to you.
Thank you, Monika, and the digital science team for having me. My name is Mike Perham. I'm the Director of Innovations and External Relations at the Howard Hughes Medical Institute Janelia Research Campus. And I'll be talking to you today about some of the challenges that we're facing as we try to increase our impact in science and how we're managing to do that. So I am part of the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. The Howard Hughes Medical Institute is an independent research institute, so it doesn't take any outside research funding. It lives off of its endowment, and it is a funder of biomedical research and a few other things, usually in the United States and with some international programs. So the investigator program, which is the highlighted program of HHMI, has been going on since 1952. It really took off in the 1980s. And it's an elite program where scientists apply and are hired by HHMI. They're actually an HHMI employee, but they stay at their host institution. And it gives them some independence from writing grants because we have a people, not projects philosophy, where we're looking for excellent researchers who are going to do great things. We'll give them a lot of resources and then check in a number of years later to see what kind of impact they've had on science. So that's, by the nature of the program, it's an elite place. That's part of just what role HHMI fills in the ecosystem. So HHMI Janelia Research Campus is one portion of HHMI, and it is a freestanding independent research institute. So we, as opposed to like a host institution, we are our own building with our own people all on site, at least in normal times. It's been working in neuroscience and imaging since 2006, but it also follows the people, not projects philosophy and operational model. So Janelia Research Campus was conceived in the year 2000, opened in 2006. It's very collaborative, and it's actually modeled after Bell Labs and the Laboratory of Molecular Biology at Cambridge University, which are also very collaborative, sort of small places, but with high impact. It's a multidisciplinary place, so they've brought in biologists, physicists, engineers, all sorts of experts to come in and attack a long-term problem that is high risk and requires a long-term focus and a lot of resources. So from 2006 to 2020, it's been focused on various portions of neuroscience and then advanced imaging, the advanced imaging being largely the development of very advanced microscopes that are not found anywhere else in the world. Janelia only has about 500 scientist researchers. They're segmented out into various groups that I'll describe in a moment. And the mission and philosophy is small labs, big science. So people stay in their labs and they continue to be hands-on. They're freed from writing grants, so they ought to be able to participate and engaged in the research that they're doing. So we have a unique structure for obtaining or pursuing this high impact. There are a number of research areas, and those first two research areas were neuroscience and advanced imaging. After 10 years, we went to a 15-year, three-part research area model. So we'll have three parallel research areas operating after they're all chosen. Currently, mechanistic cognitive neuroscience is the thing that replaced the sort of circuit neurobiology that had been going on for the first 10 to 12 years. And then there's a research area competition to choose area 2. There will be another to choose area 3. And those will go on for a minimum of 15 years or 15 years and with a guaranteed funding and about 10 to 15 labs in each one of those things. In the meantime, they chose to move the imaging research into what's called a core research area and combine it with some of the other groups that are essentially permanent. So molecular tools, those make synthetic molecules, fluorescent proteins, and so forth, along with the advanced imaging microscopes and electron microscopes and various other sorts of sensory tools, and then the computation and theory people that work collaboratively with all these other groups to model neurological processes or some protein dyes, microscopes, apps full of data, probes, other microscopes, and big data sets that are all meant to impact and drive science forward. We do this a number of different ways. So this is essentially how I advertise some of the technologies and things that are useful to science. And these are some of the mechanisms that we use to get those things out in the world, from plasmids to zebrafish, and of course data, which I have been promoting to that we use Figshare internally. So another big issue is we are essentially an experiment in science. There weren't a whole lot of precedents for the exact thing that became Janelia. And we obviously want to know, both as HHMI, but also as Janelia, are we effective? Is this a useful thing that we've done? Are we wasting time and money? And how do we measure that? So, of course, there are traditional metrics, awards. We have one Nobel Prize associated with Janelia, many more associated with the investigator program. You can always measure publications and references to publications and so forth. Outcomes. So we are training and giving opportunities to early stage scientists by making them independent earlier than they would be under, say, an R01 grant or after long postdocs. So we can look at their careers and how effective they've been later on. And then now these metrics that have become more popular and developed by folks like digital science, the alt metrics, the dimensions badge, that's what we're starting to get into now. And one of the reasons we want to do that is so that we can measure things like these tools that we develop and these teams that we have. Are those effective? And how can we break that down to determine whether they're effective? So one of the ways that we do that is to perform experiments, data experiments, and saying, over time, how has a tool been shown to impact science, impact publications, has been picked up in all these different sort of alt metrics, and the same thing for teams. And then, of course, there are other dimensions that we're sort of exploring or looking at. How else can we determine whether we've been successful? An example of this is GCAMP6, which is one of the fluorescent proteins developed by a lab, further developed by one of the project teams. Very successful. It's had a huge impact on neuroscience and increasingly on cell biology. And this is an example of the dimensions report showing, many thousands of citations, recent citations, relative ratios, that kind of thing. And then another thing that we're trying to do is increase impact. So one of my jobs as an administrator who's working in dissemination and open science is to improve and promote the use of fair data. Release those data sets, get them out there, make them citable and findable, even if they don't make it into your paper. Also, I work with these material repositories that I posted earlier for flies, for plasmids, for viruses, that kind of thing. We try to make the use of software repositories a little more consistent. GitHub is obviously a very popular one, just making sure that things are documented well. And then promoting the use of a DOI through something like Figshare. We think that will make it certainly makes it easier for us to measure these research outcomes and these research outputs that we've put out into the world and see how they're impacting things, see how they're cited. And then, of course, one of my core jobs is licensing, which I believe is also a huge factor in increasing our impact on the scientific community for both for-profit and nonprofit institutes that carry out their own research. So that's a quick summary of what we're doing at Janelia, and I guess we will get to questions in just a moment.
Thanks, Mike. And now, as promised, we are going over to a live Q&A session with our speakers. You can follow the link below or just hold tight and we will transfer you over. See you there in a few minutes.